of the opening of the sarcophagus. So Carter passed away. Scientists note too, the tomb may have been filled with a deadly fungus that grew over the centuries, like you were saying, from the paint, right? Air samples were taken from inside of the unopened sarcophagus through a drilled hole, and there was high levels of ammonia, formaldehyde, hydrogen sulfide, all inside of the sarcophagus. So these would have emitted a really strong scent, and of course, people would have, stepped back from that when it was open because it would have been horrendous. But so some interesting things, right? So we've got Carter's canary being eaten by a cobra, but we got to remember this is in Egypt. This isn't Carter living in England, right?
Yeah.
So cobras are kind of like cockroaches. They're there. They're part of life in that country, and I guess when you live with these creatures, you sort of expect them to sometimes get inside your home when, and of course a canary in a cage would be a really easy meal for a cobra.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So, I mean, there's so many interesting things about this. Again, it's all comes down to whether you believe in curses or you do not. Right. But it makes for a good story, right?
It does.
And we're still talking about it nearly 100 years later, right? We're still talking about this. I think that it just goes sort of hand in hand with anything that we can't explain or don't understand. As humans, we like to attach some sort of supernatural
blame it on the curse
to it, right? So I wonder how your relative felt at the time when they heard all of this, like firsthand. That would have been really interesting to know, right? You can imagine, just watching Downton Abbey, the gossip between the staff at the house, right? So now, of course, we know that those people from Downton Abbey didn't live there because Carnarvon lived there then.
Yep.
Right, but you could sort of imagine like how exciting that would be for your relative to hear these stories firsthand, being an employee of the household that funded the Tut tomb. Like that's really cool. And you put that personal side to it, because a lot of times people don't think about that. They're just like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. But I always think about, what would have been said amongst the staff at the time when this was happening, right? Because they would have been were they allowed to discuss this amongst themselves, or were they told they weren't allowed to discuss this? I mean, we don't really know what Carnarvon was like as an employer. Maybe he didn't want his staff to discuss the things that he was involved in, but I'm sure there would have been on their downtime people talking about it, and
some kind of discussion. Yeah.
After he died, like imagine, do you know how long your relative, like how old was your relative then when they?
No idea.
Know? Okay. Do you know their name?
Nope.
Oh, so it's just a story that.
Yeah, as I say, it's just a story that's been told down through the generations of my family.
Right.
From that time.
But it's cool. That's a cool story to have, right? It's like, it would be great to know who it was, like, even if you know which side of the family it comes from, like, is it from your mom's side or your dad's side? Because
from my dad's side of the family.
So then you would think maybe the last name is the same. Possibly, maybe.
Possibly, yep.
Unless they were a child of, somebody else in the family.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you couldn't, I don't know if they kept records, if Carter kept records of his staff from that time, if that might be something that you could check to see if there is a Russell or perhaps another name that is still in your family tree that you could connect that and find out who they were. And I guess it would have been a guy, right? As a gardener, it was mostly men at that time. Yeah. So, and he was probably a young man. He was probably only in his early 20s or something. And, that was a hard job to maintain those grounds every day. You would have probably
on an estate like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You would have probably been a younger person. I'm sure he would have, there may have been a head gardener who may have been older, but all that physical labor every day, maintaining everything on the property and that, right? I mean, that was a big estate back then, so that would have been a huge job. But how cool! Like that's,
Yeah.
you got to think like I said, I'm always thinking about, I wonder what the staff said. Like, I wonder what they said to each other. Were they out there while they were doing the yard work going, oh, did you hear about what they found? Oh, like those stories, right? Because I don't know, that would have been pretty exciting in 1922 to be working for somebody who funded that and, found that tomb, right? Because it's just such a huge find, and it's still a huge deal today.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
I mean, like I said, it's probably the richest intact tomb that we found. And that's something too, you have to think, like, if Tutankhamun's tomb was so chock-a-block with all of those items, and Carter, I got to give this guy credit, because like I say, this was the, early beginnings of archaeology. He documented every single item and where it was. So they didn't just go in and start removing everything and taking it out. And, like so many did. So many went in and they just started removing stuff. And there was no record of where it was or the location, but they drew everything out.
He documented all of that. Yeah.
Numbered everything as it was coming out. Everything got a number, everything. So, it's like there's some digs today that don't even have that level of just documentation to them, right? I mean, we try, I think, to do it, but and the other thing that's confusing too is, like, when you find an artifact, and I've worked on a number of sites where you'll find, especially indigenous sites, where there's been activity in terms of, creating spearheads and arrowheads and that. And every tiny little piece of debris that was chipped off of a piece of flint is considered an artifact. So when they say we found 30,000 artifacts, that means that we found a lot of little chips.
Tiny pieces.
Yeah. Little tiny pieces while you're there, doing that, right? And I've made a few of those arrowheads myself with that and the flint knapping. And there's a lot of little pieces that come off, right? So, I can't even imagine going back and counting all of those. And thankfully what I was doing, I didn't have to count any of those. That wasn't my job, right? I mean, I did more research, so I didn't have to do all that. But yeah, I mean, these are interesting things, and curses, and where would we be today without the finding of this tomb, right? I mean, I think it propelled archaeology into the forefront for most of the world, in terms of knowing what was out there. But it makes me wonder too, like in the tombs that had been raided in history past, how many things came out of these tombs? Like, how much gold was there? I'm sure some tombs really had not a lot of those types of things, but what happened to those artifacts? Like, I suspect most of them were taken apart, and the gold was melted down. Right. The silver would have been melted down. The gemstones and those things would have been removed and repurposed or sold individually in pieces. And so there was much more money to be made that way than there was to just sell an artifact as it's, as standing. But so many things that would have been destroyed in the name of, funding, putting money in your pocket, right? I mean, even mummies, we know how many hundreds of thousands of mummies were removed from these tombs, right? Yeah. And where did they end up? I mean, so many people.
Some of them were sold as oddities.
Yeah, well, yeah, hey, imagine that, right? I happen to have two.
Put them on display in your living room in your house, or in the sitting room.
In my sitting room. I have an Egyptian mummy and I have an Iron Age bog mummy. So I have Bob, he's my Egyptian mummy.
Bob.
Bob. It's kind of funny because that story came about when I was doing a presentation, doing one of the unwrappings,